My name is Stella Morrison, 32 years old and senior legal counsel at Meridian Tech. I never thought a single signature would change the fate of a billion-dollar company, or that a promise made to our founder would become my shield against his own son. In the boardroom that day when Maxwell Whitman said my contract was worthless, he had no idea what his father had secretly arranged years before. Sometimes the smallest legal detail can topple the mightiest of business empires. While I tell you how a single signature changed the fate of a billion-dollar company, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more stories of corporate justice served cold. I graduated from Columbia Law School at the top of my class. Not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I outworked everyone else. My father was a construction worker who broke his back on the job when I was 16, and my mother cleaned hotel rooms to put food on our table. Their sacrifice fueled my determination. Every late night studying case law, I pictured their tired faces and pushed harder. 7 years ago, Meridian Tech took a chance on me as a junior counsel. The company was already a rising star in biomedical technology with innovations that were changing patient care across the country. I remember walking into the sleek glass headquarters on my first day, terrified someone would realize I didn't belong there with my secondhand suit and student loan debt. Harold Whitman, the CEO and founder, noticed me during my third week. I had stayed until midnight preparing a contract negotiation, and he found me in the conference room surrounded by stacks of paper. Most new attorneys would have gone home hours ago, he said, leaning against the doorframe. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Mr. Whitman, I just wanted to make sure we had leverage on the exclusivity clause. He smiled, his eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Harold was in his 60s then, with silver hair and the energy of someone decades younger. Call me Harold, and show me what you found. That night marked the beginning of a mentorship I never expected. Harold had built Meridian from nothing after 30 years as a medical researcher. He understood both the science and business sides, but admitted legal matters sometimes eluded him. That is why I need sharp minds like yours, he told me. For the next 3 years, I absorbed everything Harold taught me about the company, the industry, and leadership. He was tough but fair, demanding excellence but acknowledging hard work. The company flourished under his guidance, expanding into new markets while maintaining the core values of innovation and integrity. My first encounter with Maxwell Whitman happened at the company holiday party 4 years ago. Harold's son had been away for years, first at an Ivy League undergraduate program, then working briefly at a competitor before attending a prestigious European business school. His return was treated like royalty arriving at court. Maxwell looked like a younger version of Harold, but where the father radiated genuine warmth, the son projected calculated charm. He worked the room with practiced ease, laughing too loudly and touching shoulders as if everyone was his closest friend. When Harold introduced us, Maxwell barely glanced at my extended hand. Legal department must be dreadfully boring. How do you stay awake? He smirked already, looking past me for someone more important. Someone has to make sure the exciting ideas are protected, I replied with a professional smile. Well, thank goodness for that, he said dismissively, before turning to greet the chief financial officer with sudden enthusiasm. Harold noticed my discomfort. Give him time, he whispered. Maxwell has always needed to prove himself. I nodded, but something in my stomach knotted. That knot, I later realized, was intuition trying to warn me. Over the next few years, I earned a reputation as a problem solver. I negotiated licensing deals that saved the company. Millions restructured our intellectual property portfolio to maximize protection and defended against a patent infringement lawsuit that threatened our flagship product. Each victory earned Harold's respect and strengthened our professional relationship. My position rose from junior counsel to associate counsel, then to deputy general counsel when the previous one retired. Then came the special project that would change everything, though I didn't know it at the time. Harold called me to his office late one evening after most employees had gone home. Stella, I need someone I trust implicitly for this, he said, looking unusually serious. We need to restructure the company bylaws. Any particular reason, I asked, already mentally reviewing the current structure. Call it preparation for the future, he said vaguely. As we grow, protections need to be in place. For the next 2 months, I worked closely with Harold on the revisions. Some changes were straightforward corporate governance updates, but others puzzled me. Harold insisted on unusual provisions regarding mergers and acquisitions, specifically a series of checks and balances that went beyond standard practice. This clause here, I pointed out during one late-night session, it creates an extraordinary veto power over any merger. That is highly unusual for a publicly traded company. Yes, Harold nodded thoughtfully, but necessary. I didn't press further. Harold had earned my trust, and if he believed these provisions were important, I would draft them perfectly. The signing ceremony was oddly private. Just Harold, myself, and an elderly company lawyer who had known Harold since Meridian's founding. The documents were notarized, filed with the proper authorities, and then seemingly forgotten as business continued as usual. 6 months after the bylaws revision, Maxwell returned from his European MBA program. Harold proudly announced his son's appointment as Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, a newly created position that essentially made him second in command. Maxwell brings fresh perspectives and dynamic thinking to our leadership team, Harold told the assembled staff, his arm around his son's shoulders. The company culture shifted almost immediately. Maxwell implemented new reporting structures that centralized power in his office. Meetings became combative rather than collaborative. Longtime employees whispered about job security as Maxwell brought in consultants from his business school network. I observed these changes with growing concern but kept my head down and focused on my work. That strategy seemed successful until Maxwell turned his attention to my department. I had spent months developing a revolutionary legal strategy for patent protection. Our research division had created a breakthrough treatment for autoimmune disorders, and I knew our competitors would try to work around our patents. Through exhaustive research, I found a novel approach combining multiple filing strategies across different jurisdictions that would create an impenetrable barrier. The night before my presentation to the board, Maxwell stopped by my office. "I hear you have something big for tomorrow," he said, casually leaning against my doorframe in a pose that mimicked his father's but lacked the genuine interest. "Yes, a comprehensive patent strategy for the autoimmune treatment," I replied, organizing my presentation materials. "Let me take a look," he said, extending his hand. "I need to understand all major initiatives before they go to the board." Something felt wrong, but he was the executive VP. "Of course," I said, handing him the folder. "I can walk you through the key points." "No need," he said, already turning to leave. "I will review it tonight." The next morning I arrived early for the board meeting, but Maxwell was already there, speaking animatedly with his father. When the meeting began, I waited for my slot on the agenda. Next item, the board secretary announced patent protection strategy for the autoimmune treatment program. I reached for my presentation remote, but Harold spoke first. "Maxwell has been working on this. Son, the floor is yours." My blood ran cold as Maxwell stood and began presenting my work slide by slide. He had loaded my presentation onto his laptop, making only superficial changes to the title page. Every strategy, every legal precedent, every innovative approach I had developed was presented as his initiative. The board members nodded approvingly. Harold beamed with pride at his son's apparent brilliance. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. By implementing this multi-jurisdictional approach, Maxwell concluded confidently, we create a competitive moat that will secure market exclusivity for at least 15 years. "Outstanding work," Maxwell, one board member commented. "This shows real strategic thinking." I remained silent, struggling to breathe normally as the meeting continued. Afterward, I waited in my office, expecting someone to acknowledge the theft, for Harold to stop by and clarify the misunderstanding. Instead, Maxwell appeared in my doorway smiling. "Good presentation, right?" "That was my work," I said quietly, hands trembling with anger beneath my desk. His smile turned patronizing. "That is how business works, sweetheart. Ideas flow up. Credit flows to leadership. You are still learning the corporate game." "I need to speak with your father about this," I said. Maxwell shrugged. "Be my guest. But remember, you look petty complaining about team contributions." I did speak to Harold later that week, carefully framing my concerns about proper attribution of work. His response shattered my illusions. "Stella, I understand your frustration, but Maxwell was supervising your project. Team effort is what matters, not individual credit. In this company, we rise together." But we were not rising together. Over the next months, a pattern emerged. My best work was appropriated or overruled. Contracts I negotiated would be changed at the last minute by Maxwell's team removing key protections. I was excluded from meetings I had previously attended, reassigned to less important legal matters, and gradually sidelined. Allies I thought I had made over the years kept their distance, afraid of being associated with someone clearly out of favor with the heir apparent. Lunch invitations dwindled. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. I became a ghost in the company I had helped build. The isolation took its toll. I began having anxiety attacks before meetings, fearing another public humiliation or dismissal of my work. Sleep became elusive as I replayed scenarios and imagined confrontations. My confidence eroded with each passing day, leaving me questioning whether I should simply resign and find another position elsewhere. But something kept me at Meridian. Perhaps it was stubbornness or the memory of Harold as he had been before Maxwell's return. Perhaps it was the knowledge that the company's innovations genuinely helped people, and walking away felt like abandoning a mission larger than myself. Whatever the reason, I stayed adapting to my diminished role and watching as Maxwell consolidated his power. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning executive meeting. Harold was reviewing quarterly projections when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His hand went to his temple, his eyes unfocused. "I seem to be," he mumbled before collapsing across the conference table. The room erupted in panic. Someone called an ambulance while the company physician was summoned from the on-site clinic. I stood frozen as Harold, my mentor and champion, was carried out on a stretcher, his face ashen. The diagnosis came quickly. Stroke. Severe but not immediately life-threatening. Recovery would be slow with uncertain prospects for returning to full capacity. Harold Whitman, the driving force behind Meridian Tech, was indefinitely sidelined. An emergency board meeting was called the next day. As Deputy General Counsel, I attended to advise on legal implications of temporary leadership. The discussion was brief and predetermined. Obviously, Maxwell is the natural choice to step in as acting CEO, the board chairman stated. He has been preparing for this role and has Harold's complete confidence. Several board members nodded in agreement. I considered speaking up about my concerns regarding Maxwell's leadership style and decision-making, but one look at the room told me my input was not welcome. The vote was unanimous, with Maxwell professionally abstaining. "I accept this responsibility with humility," he said afterward, his practiced solemnity betrayed by the gleam in his eyes. "My father's vision will continue to guide Meridian through this transition." Within days, that claim proved hollow. Maxwell announced a company-wide strategic realignment that began with layoffs. Most of those let go were longtime employees who had been loyal to Harold, some who had been with the company since its founding. Their institutional knowledge walked out the door with their cardboard boxes. Cost-cutting measures followed that threatened the quality of our products. Research timelines were accelerated, testing protocols abbreviated. The focus shifted dramatically from Harold's long-term vision of sustainable innovation to quarterly profit reports that would impress analysts and boost Maxwell's reputation as a decisive leader. I tried to raise concerns through proper channels, documenting potentially dangerous corners being cut, but my reports disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Maxwell had installed loyalists in key positions who ensured dissident voices never reached decision-makers. 3 weeks after Harold's stroke, I stayed late finalizing some contract revisions. The office was nearly empty at 9:30, just security guards and a few dedicated employees. Passing by Maxwell's office on my way to the elevator, I heard voices, though his door was closed. "Meridian's core technology is the real prize," an unfamiliar voice said. "The rest can be liquidated after closing." I froze, then slowly moved closer to the door. "Apex appreciates your directness," another voice replied. "Our analysis shows significant redundancies we can eliminate immediately. Just make sure the retention packages for key executives are secured before announcement." Maxwell's voice now unmistakable in its smugness. "The board will resist initially, but the premium over market price will win them over." "And your father?" someone asked. A pause. "My father is in no condition to object. His medical proxy ensures we can proceed without complications." I backed away silently, heart pounding. Maxwell was negotiating to sell Meridian to Apex Conglomerate, a notorious corporate raider. Everyone in the industry knew their playbook: acquire innovative companies, strip their assets, patent portfolios, and client lists, then discard the empty shell along with most employees. Over the next week, I conducted discreet research into Apex's acquisition history. The pattern was consistent and devastating. Their promises of investment and growth evaporated after deals closed. Facilities shuttered, jobs offshored, research abandoned if it did not yield immediate profits. Harold's life work, the company he built to improve medical care, would be dismantled for quick profit. I requested a meeting with Maxwell, which was delayed 3 times before being granted a 15-minute slot. When I finally entered his office formally, Harold's The Family Photos and Science Awards had been replaced with modern art and Maxwell's framed business school diploma. "This needs to be quick, Stella. I have a call with Tokyo in 10 minutes, he said without looking up from his computer. "I have concerns about rumors regarding Apex conglomerate," I said directly. His fingers stopped typing. His eyes met mine, cold and calculating. "Rumors are unbecoming of senior staff. If you have heard things, they should remain unheard. If Meridian is considering a merger or acquisition proper, procedures must be followed. The legal department should be involved from the beginning to ensure compliance and protect company interests." Maxwell leaned back in his chair. "Business evolves, Stella. Sometimes it evolves beyond people who cannot adapt. Your job is to execute legal strategy as directed, not create it. My job is to protect this company," I countered, feeling a strange new courage, including from decisions that might damage its future. His face hardened. "Let me be clear. You will support whatever direction leadership takes, or you will find yourself without a position here. Despite what you may think, your contract is not worth the paper it is printed on, if I decide you are obstructing progress." I maintained composure, but inside something broke. The last vestige of respect I had for the Whitman name shattered. "I understand your position," I said quietly, and left his office. That evening, I cried in my office for the first time in my professional career. Not just for myself, but for Harold's dream being corrupted, for dedicated colleagues who would soon lose their livelihoods, for patients who needed the treatments we were developing. I pulled open my desk drawer to find tissues and discovered a sealed envelope I had forgotten about. It was a personal letter from Harold given to me after we completed the bylaws revision. "Open when needed most," he had written on the outside. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. "Stella," the letter began in Harold's distinctive handwriting, "if you are reading this, you have recognized a threat to Meridian's mission that others cannot or will not see. I have always valued your integrity above all else. Remember our work together on the corporate bylaws. Section 7, paragraph 12, may be of particular interest. Courage, my friend. Harold." As I read those words, a distant memory clicked into place. The unusual provisions, the private signing ceremony, Harold's insistence on specific language about merger approvals. With renewed purpose, I headed to the records room to find the original documents. The company archives occupied a windowless room in the basement level, a stark contrast to the sleek modern spaces above. Most documents were digitized now, but original signed copies were still preserved for legal purposes. I used my security badge to enter, nodding to the night guard who barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. The bylaws would be in the corporate governance section. I scanned the labeled boxes until I found what I needed. Corporate bylaws, original documents, 2018 present. The cardboard box was dusty, clearly undisturbed since being placed there. I carried it to the small research table in the corner and carefully removed the contents. Meeting minutes, drafting notes, and finally the leather-bound copy of the finalized bylaws with original signatures. As I opened it, memories flooded back of the late nights working with Harold on precise language. "We need absolute clarity here," he had insisted, as we worked on the merger approval sections. No room for creative interpretation. At the time, I had attributed his caution to general corporate prudence. Now, with Maxwell's scheme in motion, I understood the foresight that had motivated him. I turned to Section 7, paragraph 12, and began reading. My breath caught as I processed the implications of the text before me. Any merger, acquisition, or material change in corporate control must receive written approval from all of the following parties. A. 2/3 majority of the Board of Directors. B. The Chief Executive Officer. And C. The designated independent verification council, namely Stella Morrison, who shall have absolute veto authority, if in her sole judgment such transaction violates the founding principles of Meridian Technologies, as established in the Everdee Corporate Charter. Below this paragraph was a handwritten note from Harold. This provision may not be amended, removed, or circumvented through any means without the express written consent of the designated Independent Verification Council. I read the paragraph 3 times to ensure I wasn't misinterpreting. The language was clear and ironclad. Harold had granted me personally veto power over any merger or acquisition, no matter what Maxwell or the board decided. They could not sell the company without my approval. My hands trembled as I processed the implications. Harold had created a failsafe with me as the trigger. But why me? The answer came in another flash of memory, our conversation about the company's mission during my first year. Profit is necessary, Harold had said, but not at the expense of helping patients. Too many companies lose their soul as they grow. Someone must stand guard. I carefully photographed the relevant pages with my phone, then returned the documents to their box and replaced it on the shelf. This discovery changed everything, but I needed verification before proceeding. The next morning I called Frederick Jameson, the elderly company lawyer who had witnessed the bylaws signing. Now retired, he agreed to meet me for coffee at a small shop far from Meridian's offices. "I wondered when you would call," Frederick said after I explained the situation. His lined face looked weary but unsurprised. "Harold always said you would figure it out when it mattered." "So the provision is real?" I asked. "Legally binding." Frederick nodded solemnly. "Absolutely binding." Harold was extremely careful about the legal construction. He wanted it to withstand any challenge. "But why me?" "I was just a junior counsel then." "Because he trusted your judgment more than anyone else's," Frederick said simply. Harold worried about Maxwell for years, saw his ambition untethered from the company's core values. He needed someone who understood both the legal framework and the heart of Meridian. "What happens if I exercise the veto?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Frederick's eyes were sympathetic but direct. "Career suicide, most likely. Maxwell will retaliate however he can. The board will see you as an obstacle. Wall Street will question Meridian's governance structure. And if I do nothing, then everything Harold built gets dismantled for parts." Frederick reached across the table to pat my hand. "No one would blame you for walking away, Stella. This is an impossible position." I thanked him and left more conflicted than ever. The power I possessed came with terrible responsibility. Hundreds of jobs hung in the balance. Research that could help thousands of patients might be abandoned. But standing against Maxwell and Apex would make me a target, potentially ending the career I had worked so hard to build. Over the next week, I investigated Apex more thoroughly, using contacts in the legal community to gather information not available in public records. What I found strengthened my resolve. Their previous acquisitions followed a predictable pattern: lavish promises to the acquired company's executives, followed by systematic dismantling once the deals closed. Former executives who had believed Apex's guarantees found themselves pushed out despite contractual protections. Communities where facilities closed suffered economic devastation. I consulted with a trusted outside attorney, explaining the situation without revealing the veto provision. Document everything she advised. Gather evidence of any improper actions or conflicts of interest. Prepare for retaliation. Following her advice, I secured copies of all relevant documents off-site and created a detailed timeline of questionable decisions since Maxwell took control. I meticulously documented instances where safety protocols were compromised and financial projections manipulated. If I was going to take a stand, I needed ammunition. The night before the scheduled board meeting to vote on the Apex merger, I stood before my bathroom mirror practicing what I would say. Different scenarios played through my mind: Maxwell's anger, board member confusion, Apex representatives' reactions. My reflection showed dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights weighing my options. My phone rang. The hospital. Harold's condition had worsened. The doctors were not optimistic. In that moment, my path became clear. Harold had entrusted me with protecting his legacy. I could not fail him now. The morning of the merger meeting dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day for the corporate execution Maxwell had planned. I selected my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, and the pearl earrings my mother had given me when I passed the bar exam. Armor for the battle ahead. Breakfast remained untouched on my kitchen counter. My stomach was too knotted with anticipation to eat. As I gathered my briefcase, my phone chimed with a text from Amanda, a former colleague who had been laid off in Maxwell's first round of cuts. Whatever happens today, some of us still believe in the real Meridian. Stay strong. The message steadied me. This wasn't just about my position or even Harold's legacy. It was about every employee who had poured their talent and dedication into building something meaningful. The security presence at corporate headquarters was unusually heavy that morning. Men in dark suits with earpieces stood at strategic points throughout the lobby, checking credentials with more scrutiny than normal. Apex was taking no chances with their prize acquisition. In the elevator to the executive floor, conversations hushed when I entered. Word had spread about the merger, though the details remained confidential. Employees glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity, assuming the legal department was merely facilitating the inevitable. Maxwell's executive assistant, Kimberly, intercepted me before I could enter the boardroom. "This is a closed meeting," she said with practiced coldness. "Only specifically invited counsel are attending." I smiled politely. As Deputy General Counsel, my attendance is required by corporate bylaws for any major transaction. Please check the attendance requirements. Her eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside after whispering into her headset and receiving confirmation. Small victory. The boardroom was already filled with unfamiliar faces in expensive suits. Apex had brought their full-team executives, financial analysts, and attorneys. They clustered at one end of the long table, speaking in confident tones about integration timelines and synergy metrics. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, holding court in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His expression flickered with annoyance when he saw me enter, quickly masked with his practiced corporate smile. "Stella, I did not expect legal to send representation. Everything has been reviewed thoroughly by outside counsel." "Just doing my job," I replied calmly, taking a seat at the far end of the table opposite the Apex contingent. Several board members nodded to me with varying degrees of warmth. A few seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings, but resigned. The meeting began with Maxwell's introduction of the Apex team, followed by a slick presentation about the strategic partnership being proposed. The financial projections showed impressive returns for shareholders, though I noticed how the slides glossed over post-merger operational details. "This represents a premium of 37% over current market valuation," the Apex CEO explained smoothly. "A tremendous opportunity for your shareholders while ensuring Meridian's innovations reach their full potential through our global infrastructure." What he did not say, but I knew from my research, their global infrastructure meant moving production to overseas facilities with minimal quality control and laying off most American employees. Technical details followed about transaction structure, financing, and regulatory approvals. Throughout the presentation, I remained silent, observing board members' reactions. Most seemed sold on the financial benefits, though a few asked pointed questions about research continuity and employee retention. The Apex team had prepared answers that sounded reassuring, but committed to nothing substantive. Finally, Maxwell stood for what he clearly envisioned as his triumphant moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter in Meridian's evolution. My father built this company with vision and determination. Now we honor that legacy by ensuring Meridian's innovations reach their full potential on a global scale." The false sentimentality made my stomach turn. Harold would be devastated to see his life's work reduced to an asset-stripping opportunity. "Change is inevitable in business." Maxwell continued his gaze, briefly meeting mine with a hint of challenge. "Those who adapt prosper. Those who resist become irrelevant. Some in our organization have expressed unnecessary concerns about this partnership." Another pointed glance my way. "But I assure you this transaction represents the best possible future for Meridian." Maxwell nodded to an Apex attorney who began distributing document folders around the table. "The agreements have been fully vetted by independent counsel. Once signed, we can begin the exciting work of integration." As folders reached each person, Maxwell continued his practice speech about synergies and market opportunities. The Apex team exchanged satisfied looks. Board members began reviewing the documents, some already reaching for pens. Before signatures are collected, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I would like to review the final page, please. Maxwell's smile tightened. Looking for spelling errors, counselor. Everything has been thoroughly reviewed by firms considerably more prestigious than our in-house team. A few nervous chuckles around the table. I maintained eye contact with Maxwell as a folder reached me. Nevertheless, proper diligence requires verification. I opened the folder and slowly turned to the signature page, then looked up at Meridian's longtime corporate secretary, Arthur Phillips, who had served since before Maxwell joined the company. Our eyes met, and I saw he already knew what was coming. Arthur, I said quietly, would you please confirm for the board the approval requirements for a transaction of this nature, according to our corporate bylaws? The room fell silent. Arthur cleared his throat uncomfortably. Standard board approval by 2/3 majority plus CEO authorization. Is there anything else? I pressed gently. Arthur glanced at Maxwell, whose expression had darkened. There is one additional requirement. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Independent Verification Council approval. And who currently holds that position, I asked, though everyone in the room already knew the answer. Arthur's response was barely audible. You do, Miss Morrison, she holds the veto. Maxwell's face drained of color as the implications registered. The board chairman leaned forward. What exactly does this mean, Arthur? Before Arthur could respond, I removed a document from my briefcase. It means that according to Section 7, Paragraph 12 of Meridian's corporate bylaws, any merger or acquisition requires my written approval as the designated Independent Verification Council. Without that approval, no transaction may proceed regardless of board or executive authorization. I passed copies of the bylaw provision to the chairman and several key board members. This provision was established by Harold Whitman, specifically as a protection against transactions that might undermine Meridian's founding principles. The Apex CEO's expression hardened. This is highly irregular. Our due diligence did not identify any such requirement. That is because, Mr. Whitman, I pointedly did not specify which one ensured this provision was protected from standard due diligence. It was designed specifically for this situation. Maxwell slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. These bylaws can be amended by board action. I shook my head slowly. Not this provision. If you read carefully, you will see it requires my express written consent for any amendment. Harold anticipated this moment and created a failsafe that cannot be circumvented. The room erupted into confused conversations. Board members huddled together reviewing the document I had provided. The Apex team conferred urgently with their attorneys. Maxwell remained frozen, his expression cycling through disbelief, rage, and panic. This transaction has been in development for months, he finally sputtered. Contracts are signed with break fees. You cannot unilaterally block a board-approved decision. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. And I am exercising that authority now because this merger violates Meridian's founding commitment to patience over profits. I then presented evidence I had gathered Apex's history of gutting research divisions, their pattern of broken promises to acquired companies' internal Meridian documents showing Maxwell's awareness of these issues and projections, of job losses that would follow the acquisition. Harold Whitman built this company to improve lives, I concluded. This transaction would destroy that mission for short-term financial gain. Maxwell's composure finally shattered. You are fired. Security will escort you from the building immediately. The chairman intervened. Maxwell, if this provision is legitimate, termination would not remove the requirement for her approval. The provision is a fabrication, Maxwell shouted, desperation evident in his voice. She forged those documents. Frederick Jameson, who I had arranged to be present, spoke from the doorway. The provision is genuine. I witnessed its creation and execution. Harold was explicit about its purpose and validity. Maxwell lunged across the table, attempting to grab the bylaw document from my hands. Give me that. This meeting will proceed. Security personnel, ironically those hired by Apex, moved to restrain Maxwell as he shouted threats and accusations. The Apex CEO watched the scene with cold calculation before standing. "Gentlemen, ladies, I believe we need to reassess this situation. Our company does not proceed with acquisitions under disputed governance conditions." He nodded to his team, who began gathering their materials. "We will be invoking the material adverse change clause in our preliminary agreement." With that pronouncement, the carefully orchestrated merger collapsed into chaos. Board members demanded explanations, Maxwell continued his tirade, and the Apex team made a dignified but hasty retreat. I sat quietly at the end of the table, watching the aftermath of the explosion I had detonated. For better or worse, Meridian would not be sold today. Harold's legacy was safe for now, but my future remained uncertain. Security escorted me back to my office after the meeting dissolved into shouting matches between Maxwell and board members. I was instructed not to leave until the situation was clarified. Through my glass office walls, I could see unusual activity throughout the legal department executives, hurrying between meetings, whispered conversations stopping when people noticed me watching. My corporate email access was cut off within an hour. My phone rang constantly with calls from numbers I did not recognize, likely journalists, who had somehow caught wind of the failed merger. I let them all go to voicemail and focused on documenting everything that had transpired while it was fresh in my mind. By mid-afternoon, Maxwell had mobilized a counteroffensive. An all-staff email described an unfortunate misunderstanding that had temporarily delayed an exciting strategic partnership. It mentioned nothing about the veto power, but suggested that certain individuals had misinterpreted corporate governance requirements, creating confusion that would soon be resolved. More concerning were the rumors that began circulating. According to colleagues who texted me, Maxwell's allies were suggesting I had suffered a stress-related episode and had misrepresented my authority. Human Resources had apparently begun gathering information about my recent work performance, focusing on any instances of missed deadlines or conflicts with colleagues. I expected to be formally terminated by the end of the day, but instead received notice of an emergency board meeting scheduled for the following morning. My presence was requested rather than required, the careful wording suggesting I retained some leverage despite Maxwell's fury. That evening, alone in my apartment, I considered my options. Walking away would be easiest. With my credentials, finding another position would not be difficult, though the industry was small enough that Maxwell could potentially damage my reputation. Fighting would mean protracted conflict with uncertain outcomes. As I contemplated my future, my phone rang with a call from the hospital. Harold had regained consciousness briefly and was asking for me. Despite the late hour, I grabbed my keys and drove to see him. The intensive care unit was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Harold looked diminished in the hospital bed tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His right side showed the paralysis typical of stroke victims, but his left hand reached weakly for mine when I approached. "You stopped it," he whispered, his speech slurred but understandable. I nodded, fighting back tears. "How did you know?" A ghost of his familiar smile appeared. Maxwell called, ranting. "Knew you had found it." "I did what you asked," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "But the company is in chaos now." Harold's eyes held mine with surprising clarity. "Fix my company, Stella. Board will listen now." "Maxwell has too much influence," I argued softly. Harold's expression hardened with determination. "Evidence. Safe deposit box. First National. Key in my desk. Third drawer." His energy seemed to flag with the effort of speaking. I promised to find whatever he had hidden away and sat with him until he drifted back to sleep. On my drive home, I wondered what Harold might have documented that could counter Maxwell's influence. The next morning brought unexpected developments. 3 board members contacted me independently before the emergency meeting, expressing support for my position and asking detailed questions about the veto provision. The company's largest institutional investor requested a private briefing on the governance issues concerned about potential shareholder litigation. Most surprisingly, several longtime employees came forward with documentation of questionable decisions Maxwell had made since taking control, quality control reports that had been buried, safety protocols that had been compromised, financial projections that had been manipulated to justify strategic shifts. The board meeting itself was tense but professional. Maxwell was conspicuously absent, reportedly meeting with outside counsel to explore options. I presented a comprehensive explanation of the veto provision, its legal foundation, and Harold's intent in creating it. Frederick Jameson confirmed my account and provided additional context about Harold's concerns regarding Maxwell's judgment. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, the chairman announced after lengthy discussion the board has decided to conduct a thorough investigation of both the governance questions and certain operational decisions made in recent months. Maxwell was temporarily suspended from his duties pending investigation results. I retained my position but was asked to recuse myself from certain decisions to avoid conflicts of interest. An interim leadership team was established, comprised of long-serving executives who had Harold's trust. The following weeks revealed the full extent of Maxwell's misconduct. Harold's safe deposit box contained meticulous records of his son's actions over the years, including evidence of self-dealing conflicts of interest and instances where he had deliberately misled the board. Most damning was documentation of kickback arrangements with Apex executives proving Maxwell would personally profit from the merger beyond his official compensation. With each new discovery, Maxwell's support eroded. Board members who had initially questioned my actions now thanked me for preventing a disastrous transaction. Employees who had feared for their jobs under Apex ownership expressed relief and gratitude. Maxwell's public response only accelerated his downfall. Rather than maintaining a dignified silence, he gave an impromptu interview to a financial news network, claiming conspiracy and betrayal. When the reporter asked pointed questions about the kickback allegations, Maxwell's composure collapsed on national television. The clip went viral in business circles, cementing his reputation as unstable and untrustworthy. 3 weeks after the failed merger, Maxwell resigned under pressure. His departure statement cited personal reasons and desire to explore new opportunities, corporate speak that fooled no one. Reports indicated he had accepted a position with a European investment firm, effectively removing himself from the immediate aftermath. My vindication came in the form of an official board statement, acknowledging the legitimacy of the veto provision and commending my commitment to Meridian's core values and governance standards. Employees who had been terminated under Maxwell's cost-cutting initiatives were invited to reapply for their positions as the company recommitted to Harold's vision of innovation and integrity. When I visited Harold in rehabilitation, where he was making slow but steady progress, he listened to my account of events with a satisfied expression. Always knew, he said, his speech still affected, but improving you would protect it when it mattered. Why did you not tell me about the provision when you created it? I asked. He managed a lopsided smile. Needed to be forgotten, until needed. His wisdom amazed me. Harold had anticipated his son's ambitions and created a countermeasure so subtle it remained hidden until the crucial moment. Not even Maxwell, with all his business education, had recognized the vulnerability in his plan. As Meridian stabilized under interim leadership, the board appointed me general counsel, recognizing that my understanding of the company's legal framework was now indispensable. With that promotion came a seat at the leadership table and the opportunity to help shape Meridian's recovery. The veto power remained in place, though now acknowledged openly in corporate governance documents. It served as both protection against future threats and reminder of how close Meridian had come to losing its soul. 6 months after the failed merger, Meridian held a special board meeting to welcome Harold back in an advisory capacity. His recovery had exceeded medical expectations, though he still required a wheelchair and had limited use of his right arm. His mind, however, remained sharp as ever. As Harold was wheeled into the boardroom, employees lined the hallway in a spontaneous show of respect. Many had tears in their eyes, remembering how close their livelihoods had come to destruction. Harold acknowledged each person with a nod or word of thanks, the emotional weight of the moment palpable. The company had transformed in his absence. With Maxwell gone, and the threat of acquisition removed, Meridian returned to its founding principles. Research once again took priority over short-term profits. Quality standards were restored and strengthened. Most importantly, the culture of innovation and integrity that Harold had cultivated over decades began to flourish again. My role had evolved as well. As general counsel, I now oversaw all legal and compliance functions with a direct reporting line to the board of directors. The veto power remained, but had been formalized into a more conventional governance structure that maintained its protective function without depending solely on one individual. More personally, I found myself healing from the trauma of the previous year. The anxiety attacks that had plagued me during Maxwell's reign subsided. I began sleeping through the night again. My confidence, so badly damaged by his dismissal and theft of my work, gradually returned as my contributions received proper acknowledgement. Working with a therapist helped me process the emotional toll of the experience. "You stood alone against significant power," she observed during one session. "That requires exceptional courage, but also exacts a price." She was right. For weeks after the confrontation, I had jumped at unexpected noises and struggled to trust even supportive colleagues. Healing came gradually through small victories and renewed connections with coworkers who shared my commitment to Meridian's mission. Maxwell's fate became a cautionary tale in business circles. His European position disappeared within months, reportedly after similar patterns of self-dealing emerged. He attempted to launch a venture capital firm focusing on biotech startups, but his reputation preceded him. Few were willing to entrust their innovations or capital to someone known for betrayal and poor judgment. Within a year, the firm folded with significant investor losses. Harold insisted I join him for lunch in his office each week, a tradition we had maintained before his stroke. During one such meeting, he mentioned Maxwell had contacted him seeking reconciliation. "What did you tell him?" I asked carefully. Harold's expression was complicated, the sadness of a father mixed with the resolve of a leader who had made difficult choices. That actions have consequences. That trust once broken requires more than words to rebuild. "Will you give him another chance?" I asked. Harold sighed. "Perhaps someday, but not at Meridian. Some bridges cannot be unburned." As Meridian stabilized, I implemented changes to prevent future governance issues. We established a mentorship program pairing junior employees with experienced leaders, ensuring knowledge transfer and creating pathways for advancement based on merit rather than connections. Mandatory ethics training for executives addressed conflicts of interest and fiduciary responsibilities with concrete examples and clear accountability measures. Most significantly, we developed a profit-sharing plan, giving all employees a stake in the company's success. When our next breakthrough treatment received regulatory approval, everyone from research scientists to maintenance staff celebrated the shared achievement and reward. The personal growth from this experience transformed my leadership approach. I found my voice in meetings where previously I might have remained silent. I became an advocate for colleagues whose contributions risked being overlooked. Most importantly, I learned to balance assertiveness with empathy, understanding that true leadership combines strength with compassion. At Meridian's 30th anniversary celebration, Harold surprised me by announcing a new company award for integrity and leadership, naming it in my honor, and presenting me as its first recipient. Standing at the podium before hundreds of colleagues, I reflected on the journey that had brought me there. True power in organizations does not come from titles or corner offices, I told the audience. It comes from commitment to principles larger than ourselves. Harold taught me that one person standing firm for what is right can change the course of an entire company. That lesson has shaped my understanding of both leadership and responsibility. I looked out at the faces of employees whose jobs and purpose had been preserved by that difficult stand. Meridian exists to improve lives through innovation. When we stay true to that mission, when we value integrity as highly as intelligence, we honor not just our founder, but the highest potential in ourselves. The standing ovation that followed was not for me alone, but for the collective recommitment to purpose that had saved Meridian from becoming another corporate casualty. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, I found a quiet moment to speak with Harold. "Thank you for trusting me with your legacy," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Not my legacy anymore. Ours now." Those simple words encapsulated the most profound lesson of this journey, that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power, that reading the fine print can change the course of history, and that small decisions made with integrity can ripple outward to protect what matters most. As I think back on that pivotal moment in the boardroom when I said those 3 words, "She holds the veto," I realize that sometimes courage is simply refusing to allow what you value to be destroyed by those who value only themselves. That lesson has guided me ever since, both in business and in life. What about you? Have you ever had to take a stand against someone who seemed to hold all the power? Would you have used the veto? If you were in my position, share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to hear more stories of corporate justice. Remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon in any battle is simply knowing your worth and standing your ground. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to protect what matters in your own life.